Recording.
Yep.
Thank you. Uh, That gives you a brief sense of where we're going with tonight's presentation. You'll get a lot more detail, a lot more information about this from our speaker. Before I introduce him, I want to thank our ushers and thank Jim Craig, who's handling sound and light, and thank Ernie, who is not only handling Zoom, but is also the person who introduced me to Ted Borer, our speaker tonight. Ted is from Princeton, as you learned here. Princeton's on a path to getting to carbon neutrality by 2046, maybe sooner than that. And the biggest part of their challenge, like our challenge here, is how to handle heating and cooling. But there are a lot of other pieces too, and you'll hear about that tonight. Ted is the energy plant director for Princeton, so a lot of this process falls into his bailiwick, and he'll talk to you about the challenges and how they're meeting those challenges. Many of the same issues are here at Kendall and Crosslands, and in the Q&A period, we'll get a chance to ask Ted about some of the ways that the work he's doing might apply here. We saw the video, so Ted, you can take it from here. Thank you.
First, George, thank you very much for the invitation, for the lovely dinner with you and your wife, and Ernie and the others. Thank you very much for supporting this. Normally, I would like to make this an interactive conversation, but because there are people on Zoom, what I'll do is I'll walk through the slides that are available, and then we'll have Q&A afterwards. But if you make eye contact, at least that shows me that, yeah, we're heading in the right direction. What I would like to do is start by telling you where Princeton University is today from an energy standpoint. That's less important, but understanding the history of where we're coming from begins to inform you where we are today and then where we're going to go. And the major point that George made is we're driving towards carbon neutrality, which in a lot of ways really simplified means not burning anything. So next slide, Ernie. What all of these things say really is we have to save the planet and we can't make up the rules. So we still need to get to carbon neutrality or essentially not burning anything, but we have to follow the law, we have to follow physics, and we need good financial stewardship. So all of these things have to be met. This isn't by way of complaining, but just sort of saying the context that we have to do our work in. Next slide. A lot like Kendall and Crossroads, we have many different types of buildings. There's athletic facilities, there's office space, there's residential space, there's cooking space. We're probably a little bit more research heavy, but we have an infirmary. So there's a lot of things that our campus and your campuses have in common. The energy intensity in different buildings is different too. So in our case, we want to focus on the most energy intense. That tends to be the research buildings. Here, I'm not sure. It might be the central facility. It might be the dining halls. We haven't really talked about what the most energy intense buildings would be. Don't worry so much about the numbers here because they're going to be much larger than this community, but they're much smaller than others. What you should really think in terms of what we're doing is community energy. What we're doing is a central energy plant that in our case supplies steam and chilled water and electricity to the campus. We make electricity by spinning a jet engine and we can get 27 megawatts out of it. And then that hot exhaust that comes out the back end of the jet engine, we can use to make steam to heat the campus. We make steam by burning natural gas and running boilers. And we make chilled water by running effectively an air conditioning process. And we can talk more in detail about that air conditioning process because really that same, what we'll call refrigeration cycle is going to be used in the next phase much more efficiently than we can burn things and release energy. And then we do already have a big form of energy storage, but it's not batteries. We have thermal energy storage. And frankly, you probably own this in your house. You have a hot water tank. I'm guessing there's a hot water tank in your houses. You might have ice in the freezer. That's also thermal energy storage. You've put energy into something and then stored it in a form that can be used later. Your hot water tank does the same thing. This is a picture of a cogeneration system. I won't go into a lot of detail, but just to say, we put fuel in a jet engine on the left-hand side, and we get two things out. So we put one energy form, natural gas or diesel fuel, and we can get electricity out the top, and we can get steam through the boiler out the aft end of the gas engine, gas turbine. The important takeaway here is the overall process is about 80% efficient, meaning 20% of the energy we bought goes up the stack. It's wasted. It goes up the chimney. So we only retain and get a useful product out of 80% of what we brought in as fuel. 20% is wasted. So what we'll see is a process later that is much more efficient than that. And that's why we're changing. Next slide, Ernie. This is a picture of our darling little gas turbine. It would be maybe halfway from me, halfway across the stage, maybe 8 feet long or 10 feet long. And it's very compact. Super powerful military fighter jet engine. 2 of those push the stealth fighter engine forward and 1 person through the air. But it's terribly inefficient. And yeah, it's compact, but only about 30% of the energy comes out to push the airplane forward, meaning that if you fly from here to California, about 70% of the energy that the pilot brings with him or her heats up the sky. It's just wasted. It does nothing productive. And we want to get away from that kind of technical model. Next slide. Here's the thermal energy storage that we do. On the left-hand side, you can see a chiller. It works just like your air conditioner. It works just like your refrigerator. These devices take heat from a cold place and reject heat to a warm place. So your air conditioner takes heat out of your cold or your cool family room, and it rejects heat to a hot outdoors. The refrigerator takes heat out of a cold box where the food is, and the refrigerator rejects heat to a warmer place. I think somebody on Zoom might want to go on mute. So this, try again.
I don't know.
This system takes heat out of a cold, chilled water system where we have a few million gallons of cold water, and it rejects it on the left-hand side through a cooling tower. And I parked by the cooling tower originally that's on this campus, so I know if you go over on the back side of the main building, there's cooling towers. Now, after we talk, you should look at that cooling tower in a different way. That device throws away perfectly good energy. How could we recapture that energy? Well, we're going to build a system that's slightly similar to this, but now it doesn't waste the energy that we currently do. And it's not to take any shots at the people who designed the system, but it's to say we can do better today than we did decades ago when we built it. All right, let's stay on that slide for a sec. One other important concept with thermal energy storage. It separates the time of production from the time of use. You heated up the water for the shower back then. Maybe you want to take a shower now. You cooled off the ice in the fridge back then. You put it in your drink now. It also separates the rate of production from the rate of use. So maybe you use solar energy, solar hot water. You spent all day heating up the tank of water. and then you take a shower in 10 minutes or something like that. The ice, maybe it took an hour or so to cool down, and then you're going to put it in your drink. I really like agricultural metaphors because they resonate with people. So potato is my favorite form of thermal storage, energy storage. It collects heat, it collects solar energy, it collects chemical energy, and it might take months, and you eat it in 15 minutes. But it grew back then, and we're going to eat it now. So it's a good model. Next slide, Ernie. This is our thermal storage tank at the university. It's about 2.5 million gallons. It's 80 feet across. It looks like it's 50 feet high, but it goes another 20 feet into the ground. The water inside it, when we cool it off, is about 31 degrees Fahrenheit. There's a little bit of nitrate, so it doesn't freeze even until it gets about 25 Fahrenheit, below our normal freezing temperature. I look at this as an ATM, an automatic teller machine. It saves us ridiculous amounts of money because at home, I think you and I pay a fixed rate of electric all day and all night. We have no economic motivation to change our behavior. So I have no financial reason why I would want to cook dinner in the middle of the night or charge the Tesla at night. I would charge the Tesla anytime I want and cook dinner and do the laundry anytime I want. But at the university, which is a small industrial or a large commercial customer, we have a variable rate of electricity. So we pay very, very little when nobody wants electricity, maybe 2 cents a kilowatt hour at night, and then maybe 25, 30 cents a kilowatt hour during the day. So we pay more than the homeowner does in the peak of the day. So when do I want to buy electricity? I want to buy it at night when nobody wants it, buy it really cheaply. And I want to avoid it when everybody wants it. So I avoid buying it very expensively. So this energy storage device, it's a big bucket of water. It's pretty simple, but I can cool off that water when it's really cheap, and I can deliver that water when it's very, very valuable. Next slide. This shows our carbon footprint over the decades. And the important thing is early 2000s, we became very, very aggressive at reducing our carbon footprint. And now it's sloping down to the right with some exceptions for very cold winters. All right. But the overall trend now since about 2007 is downward. And our ultimate goal by 2046 is to get to zero. And I'll tell you that we're hoping to do it a lot sooner than that. Next slide. Really simple terms, what I want you to see is the blue is the campus growing in millions of square feet. So it went from maybe 6 or so million square feet on the right-hand axis, all the way up. We're now scaring 10 million square feet. All right, we're almost that many square feet of conditioned space. The purple is the energy use per square foot. This is an interesting metric because it means that I could compare Princeton University to Kendall. I can compare energy use per square foot per year, and it really speaks to how tight are our buildings. It doesn't speak about how big they are or how much energy we use. It speaks about really how good stewards we are of energy per square foot. Next slide. This is the university's stated goal. On the left-hand side is a few years behind us. On the right-hand side, you can see the bottom axis, it says 2046. If we did nothing, we'd follow a business as usual trend. The university would continue growing. And on the right-hand side, you can see it says BAU on the top right, business as usual. We would increase our carbon footprint year by year and end up way worse than we are. Our plan is not just to assume do nothing, then magic happens and we get to zero, but a downward slope every year so that gradually we hit 2046 with essentially no carbon footprint per year. The orange area that it says geo-exchange, basically that's the important thing that we're going to talk about tonight is how we're going to harvest, again, agricultural metaphors, harvest heat from the university during the summer and deliver heat to the university, take it back from storage during the winter. And we'll also tighten up the buildings, so make them more and more efficient, do air sealing and insulation, and do things like changing any incandescent lights to LEDs. Improving the building energy controls. So if none of us are in this room, maybe this room would coast downwards towards the outdoor temperature. It wouldn't be freezing in here, but just allow it to coast downward some. And then before it was occupied, we'd warm it up, and that might save us a little energy. So what we call scheduling of occupancy is very important. The next thing we have to do is power all that stuff with green or renewable energy, and primarily solar on campus, and then wind or solar off campus. The very last bit at the bottom right may be biodiesel, but that doesn't have a zero carbon footprint. It's going to be something that we still need to mitigate a little bit. Next slide. Major areas that we're going to do. We're going to tighten up the buildings. Anything we build now will be to the highest performance standards, and any major renovation. So if we gut and renovate a building, that will be highest energy performance standards. We'll replace our district steam system, and I'll show you a map showing steam going all over the campus to heat the campus. We'll replace that with a hot water system, and we're well on the way of that. We will create an electric powered heat pump facility, and then we'll create daily thermal storage tanks, or we've actually built them. They're not, we're just doing the hydro testing now. And then we will create thermal, annual or seasonal thermal storage, and we'll use the ground. So we'll have a big tank of water like I showed you before, but that's really to store and recover energy on a daily basis. That's more of an economic game that we're going to play every single day. And the seasonal energy storage is to take up the difference between really hot summers and really cold winters. And we'll capture the heat from the summer and be able to use that heat during the winter. Then solar renewable energy. And we won't be able to decorate the campus with solar enough to power everything that we possibly could. We just couldn't put solar everywhere that we needed to power the whole campus. So we'll still have to go off campus and use other land to put solar or wind and have that conveyed to the university. Next slide. One of the things that we had talked about earlier was deferred investment is actually your friend in this case. So we looked at a map of all the STEAM network on campus. So we've been building this since the 1860s, and we actually have some steam lines that are in service. They were put in service in 1906. The people who built these steam lines, they couldn't imagine the First World War was going to happen. And they're still running today. So we know that we're going to have to replace these, and we're going to have to replace them sooner than later. So all those ones that are red, we know have to be replaced pretty soon. Why should we replace those with old, inefficient technology when we can replace those with much newer, and new doesn't matter, it's more efficient technology is what we want. So high capital investment, but we already had a lot of stuff that was breaking and falling apart and high maintenance. So let's replace it with something better, not replace it in kind. Next slide. This is what we're doing today. On the right-hand side, we're burning stuff in boilers. We're sending heat to the campus 24/7, 365 all year. Because we're a research campus, we even need steam for cage washers and sterilizers and autoclaves, a lot of research things, but also to take a shower, to wash your hands, to do the dishes. We need that even in August. On the left-hand side, we're also doing this 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. We're adding energy to the chiller. We're pulling heat out of the campus. Even in the middle of February, we're running lasers and electron microscopes and CT scan machines and lots of computers, and they all need heat removed from them. And then we're throwing that heat away. You say, well, couldn't you capture that heat that you're throwing away on the left and use it on the right? And the answer is yes, but not with the stuff that we've got today. We need to change this just a little bit. Next slide, Aaron. So we're going to keep the diagram similar, but we're going to move the chiller over and we'll call it a heat pump. And that same chiller will continue to pull heat out of the chilled water system, removing heat from all the lasers and electron microscopes and stuff. And it will deliver it to the hot water system. But I used to be sending steam at maybe 250 degrees Fahrenheit. Now I'm going to send hot water at 150 degrees Fahrenheit. So I need to modify the heating systems in the buildings so that the buildings are still adequately heated. So we might have to change the radiators, or we might have to change the equipment inside the mechanical room that circulates air through this room. The people on Zoom can't see it, but the people in this room, you can see these louvers on the side of the room where air is coming in. Way back behind there in the mechanical room, there's a heat exchanger that's dumping heat into the air, and then that air circulates through this room. Same kind of thing here on a 200 building scale. The other arrows I want to point out to you are, there's a difference between the amount of heat I need in the summer and the amount of cooling I need in the summer. There's a difference between the amount of heat I need in the winter, the amount of heat I need in the summer. So I need a place to put the excess, or a place to pull the deficiency from. And that's going to be the GeoExchange, the ground heat exchanger that we're going to build. Next slide. I'm going to skip the Thermodynamics 101 class. We could spend a lot of time discussing how a refrigerator works, or an air conditioner, or a heat pump. But if you'll trust me that the device that's key here, inside the fridge or the air conditioner or the heat pump, pulls heat from a cold place and it delivers heat to a hot place, what you really need to know is that you can move. There's two verbs that are very important here. The cogeneration system converts heat from one form to another. The heat pump moves heat from one place to another. So instead of converting energy that's going to have, like we talked about, maybe an 80% efficiency, we're going to put in a device that moves heat from here to there. If George wants to move a wheelbarrow that's got stuff in it that outweighs him, he can still do that. He can still move something that's heavier than he is, and he can push it along with a wheelbarrow, right? So that sounds like magic when it comes to refrigeration, but that's essentially what we're doing. We're putting a little bit of energy in that allows us to move a whole lot of energy from one place to another. And so now we can have what looks like an efficiency of 400% or 500%. I know that's, uncomfortable for a mechanical engineer to say, but it effectively is the same thing. By putting a little bit of energy into a refrigeration system and not throwing it away with the cooling tower, we can be 4 or 5, maybe even 6 times more efficient than the cogeneration plant that we thought was really efficient 25 years ago. Next slide. I'll go through these quickly, but I want you to get a gut feel for moving heat versus converting it. When we move heat from one place to another, when we burn something, some energy is lost, right? Some energy, some heat goes up the chimney. Only part of the heat that we bought as firewood or as diesel fuel or as natural gas gets delivered to the conditioned space. Let's skip to the next slide. When you compress something, it heats up a little bit. If you've pumped up a bicycle tire, that pump itself heats up a little bit. So compressing the gas heats it up. Next slide. When you allow that gas to expand, it's going to cool down. So letting the air out of my bike tire or running your propane grill or even discharging a spray paint can, they all cool down as the gas is expanding. Next slide. And you know that heat tends to move from a warm place to a cold place. Next slide. And we can get rid of heat through evaporation or even through conduction if I touch something very cold. Next slide. So we could reject heat off the back of the fridge and just dump it in the kitchen where we didn't really want to heat up the kitchen in the summer, right? That's not helpful. But what we like to do, you're still going to use hot water in the summer. Wouldn't it be neat if we took the coils off the back of your refrigerator and we stuck them in the incoming water? So now, instead of heating up your kitchen in the summer, we could actually use the fridge to warm up the water as a byproduct of cooling off the food. Nobody's done this yet, but I could see it happening in the future. Next slide. And then you can gain heat just through sitting in the sunshine or adding heat underneath, or the conduction of heat between one hand and another. Next slide. So the refrigeration process that we're going to take advantage of takes advantage of compression, heat rejection, expansion, and heat pickup. And that is enough thermodynamics for this evening. Next slide. And this is a big industrial chiller, but it works just the same as your air conditioner. And all I did was put a picture there so you have a sense of scale. So you know how big this thing is. That one chiller is enough to cool off nearly 5,000 people on the hottest day of the summer. All right, so that's a very big industrial chiller. Next slide. What you're seeing is a graphic of a 3-year period, the red being heat delivered to the campus and the blue being heat removed from the campus. And you can see on the far left, it's halfway through the winter. Then you get 2 humps in the middle, or 2 more winters, and then another half winter. At the bottom, you get 3 summers. The important thing for us, there's a discontinuity between how much heat I need in the summer and how much heat I need in the winter. And we're going to take advantage of that by capturing or harvesting the heat in the summer, storing it, and then delivering it in the winter. And by moving heat instead of converting energy, we can do that very, very efficiently. Next slide. On the left, you see a picture of a drilling rig. So we're going to put lots of bores, 850 feet in the ground. Like you saw in the video, they're as far down in the ground as 30 Rockefeller Center is tall. So like a 70-story building, but they go way, way, way down the ground with a plastic tube and then come back up. And then we fill it with grout, fill the outside around that with grout. So it's really stuck in the ground. It's like putting it in concrete, 850 feet deep. So if I pour really hot water down that tube, it will give up its heat to the ground. And if I do that for months during the summer, I heat up all the rock underneath the campus. Then if I want that heat from the campus, I can put cool water down the tube in the fall, and it comes back to me a little bit warmer. And through the heat pump process, sort of like reversing your air conditioner, I can deliver that heat to the campus all winter. So we're using this huge volume of rock, billions of cubic feet of rock, billions of pounds, as a storage volume to store the heat all summer and then deliver it back to the campus in the winter. Next slide. And that's a picture just so you can see the size pipe that we're putting down the ground. It goes down in a U and comes back up. Next slide. This is an architect's rendering, but it's the plant, and that plant is almost built. The roof's on, the walls aren't on, and the equipment's not in it. It's all framed up in steel though, and those tanks are already built in concrete. I was looking at it yesterday. Next slide. We value, we're good stewards of land, and we value land in 3 dimensions. So we'll put these geo exchange bores underneath the parking deck, put the parking deck at the surface, and then put solar panels on top. And we do that for a playing field, or we do that for a surface parking lot as well. Next. I'm gonna skip this and just say there's a lot of business models. There's different ways that you can buy solar energy. You can own it, or I could pay somebody else to own it. He spent the money on it. He owns it. He sells me electricity, and he gets paid back for his investment through the sale of electricity. So we give him permission to build stuff on our property, and he's able to get revenue from the solar, and we get the benefits of solar sooner. There's a lot of different business models. Next slide. You can see we have several large ground-mounted solar arrays, and we have many handful of building top and several parking deck mounted solar arrays. Right now, we're able to generate about 20% of the electricity that the university needs all year. Next slide. And there's a picture just to show you what it looks like. Solar panels up above a parking deck, and on the left in the background, solar panels over a surface parking lot. And I think I'd like to land it there and really start a conversation if you're interested.
Great. Thank you very much for that presentation, and we'll open it up for questions. But first, I have a two-part question for you.
Certainly.
You talked about storing heat in the geo-exchange process underground. What about storing cold during the winter for use in the summer? And part two, on the day, okay, at the end of this summer, let's suppose you have your system working. At the end of the summer, is the rock ready for next winter, or does it take multiple yearly cycles to get that rock fully hot?
All right. First of all, these are really insightful questions, but let's start with the first. What about storing cold instead of storing heat? Engineers have arbitrarily decided that heat is a positive quantity and cold is a negative, or removal of heat is a negative quantity. So we could, it almost depends, when do we first activate the system? So if I first activate the system in the fall and I start withdrawing heat from the ground, then I would cool the heat down in the winter, and I'd have a deficiency of heat, and I'd need to pay that heat back during the summer. It's our plan really to do the opposite, is to remove heat from the campus during the summer. And if you can see that the activity is going to be centered around the ground's natural temperature. Am I going to bring it above its natural temperature and allow it to coast down? Or am I going to bring it below its natural temperature and bring it back up? I'm hoping that we can eventually cycle right around the Earth's natural temperature, but I think in general will be slightly above or back down too. And that gets to your second question, which is really, let me rephrase it. I think what you're asking is, will we eventually deplete a resource and the ground gets colder and colder, or will we eventually overheat and the ground gets warmer and warmer?
Well, that's a great question, but it isn't exactly.
Oh, okay, ask again. I misunderstood.
My question is this, is one cycle enough to get the rock to its ultimate top temperature for the following winter, or must it gradually build up over, say, 3 or 4 years?
So the design of the system is such that it should be enough, but I won't misrepresent it. We're all going to learn in the first winter, and we're not throwing away the existing cogeneration system or the existing chillers. So if I need to, I can still supplement what's there, either through heat rejection or heat delivery. But our hope and our expectation through design is that the geo-exchange should be almost everything we need. But in fact, we haven't designed to try to hit the absolute extreme peak or the absolute extreme cooling. We might need half again more geo-exchange, which would be very, very expensive. Instead, we'll still run our conventional heating and cooling maybe a few hundred hours a year. And that saves us a huge capital investment by not being absolutist and saying everything must be geo-exchange, everything has to be heat pumps. We can do a little of each and save a tremendous amount of capital and minimal extra pollution.
Okay, thank you very much. Let's throw it open to questions.
Ted, the source of funding and the reliability thereof.
You want to identify yourself?
Jim Hazard.
Hey,
There we go.
Jim. So let's see. Ultimately, we're paying for this through future energy spend. Obviously, that's future money. But what we're doing is reducing OpEx. We need to, the university has to invest the CapEx, has to spend the money up front. But will eventually, if we did a net present worth, or if we did, if we did a net present worth value calculation, we'd say the decision to do this is going to be a lower cost activity than to not do this, but it's going to take quite a period of time to pay ourselves back. Does that get at what you were asking? Essentially, it's coming from avoided future energy spend.
Do we have a Zoom question at this point?
We do, and Congressman, please unmute yourself and ask your question.
Thank you for this. Very interesting indeed. A lot of us have been learning little bits of this from George's work, so we thank him for being here. My question is this: how do the rocks react to be heating and cooled? They're part of a sort of natural system in some kind of way. And my sense is that natural systems are often really quite sensitive, so that the changing the temperature of those rocks up and down, does it have any spin-off effects that we need to think about, or that you have thought about? Or
So first of all, I want to say I totally agree with you that we need to be thoughtful about how we use the environment and our resources. And I have a couple answers to you. First of all, we're not going to give up heating and cooling. So this is probably way, way, way better than the alternative of burning stuff. But to answer your question more directly, the NJDEP, New Jersey Department of Environmental Protection, asked us that same question. And we went to our peers who are ahead of us in this game, Ball State University, or there's a handful of others, but Ball State University is a good example. They also have hundreds, I think they're up to about 3,000 geo-exchange wells. And we said, well, what about the trees? What about the rock that's close to the surface? And their experience is it still snows. You can't tell that the geo-exchange field is here and the geo-exchange field is not there. You get the same depth of snow. It's not that there's cats sleeping all over a warm field over here and snow over there. And that the outdoor air temperature has a much stronger influence on the first few feet of soil and rock than anything we could do. I didn't say it before, but one of the important things to understand is this is contains liquid. I have to bury it. The top of my geo-exchange system has to be below the frost line. So I start 3, 4, 5 feet below surface and go down from there. But the NJDEP said, okay, that's nice that it happens in a different state, but what about here in New Jersey? We have put in a thermal well in the middle of the geo-exchange field, and then we put another one between us and our nearest down gradient neighbors, because we don't want her cold water to come out warm from the tap, or her warm water to come out cold because we've depleted the ground. So we are very serious about demonstrating that the thermal plume underground really doesn't travel very far. And our peers who have already done this have already demonstrated that, but we're going to show it applies in New Jersey just as it does elsewhere. Really good question and a very important one.
thank you.
Yeah. Jeff Levine, my question is one of the scale of the project. Is it scalable up and down, or do you need a campus size function to justify and succeed? Or could you do it for a residential unit on the same principle?
Yeah, Jeff, that is totally on point, and it's something that's very important deeply to me. You could do it at your house. I actually intend to do it at our house, but I won't do it until our air to air heat pump dies. So I'm going to use my existing equipment as long as I need it. I have a little tiny backup heat pump just for my office. So if the main one for the house dies, we can snuggle up in the office until we can get the other one built. But it's my intent to do geo exchange at my house. It absolutely scales down to single family residence. How far does it scale up? I think of this as community scale energy. Absolutely for a campus. If we were building this campus today, I'd absolutely want to be doing this. As a retrofit, you have to think, not should be, but when is it most appropriate to retrofit this? Maybe as things are breaking, falling apart, becoming higher maintenance, more expensive. Where would this not apply? Where would this be a stupid idea? Well, let's say we're neighbors in Nebraska and my farm is about 3/4 of a mile from yours and your farm is about 3/4 of a mile from hers. The amount of pipe that we would have to put in for thermal energy to hit our whole community would be too expensive. So we would do her house and your house and my house as standalone. It still makes sense, but not as community energy. So you need not necessarily urban density, but you need some kind of human density to justify it, not completely spread out all over the place. Does that make sense? Again, really good question. Could we scale up to the nation? Yes, in metropolitan areas, military bases, airports, hospitals, universities, research campuses, retirement villages. Brilliant.
Another Zoom question?
Yes, Gary Johnson, please unmute yourself.
Hi, I'm assuming this is fluid going into these underground pipes.
Yes.
And-
It's
and-
water.
Water, okay, is it water that has antifreeze in it?
So I strongly want to avoid that. We don't want biological growth. We don't want scale deposition, and we don't want corrosion. But I'm using, we're using HDPE. It's a high density polyethylene.
Michelle. Oh, okay, fine. But it's getting wet, okay? Thank you. All right, have a good night.
So we shouldn't get. a
Sorry,
lot of-
somebody's yelling in the background.
Yeah, no worries. We shouldn't get a lot of corrosion. And we want to use the absolute least amount of chemicals to mitigate biological growth and deposition. And we're going to try to use as much mechanical means, meaning filtration, as possible before using chemicals. Does that
Is
address
there
your
any
question?
concern you have about affecting the groundwater in the community?
No, well, let me say, I'm deeply concerned about it and I'm highly confident that we won't. We have HDPE, high density polyethylene. It's a continuous pipe. There's not a break in it. There's not a mechanical joint anywhere. It's tested to 1.5 times its pressure. So if it operates at 160, I think we test to about 250 pounds per square inch gauge. That pipe goes down the ground and back, and then we embed it in grout. So it's basically in a sleeve of concrete continuously. So no two aquifers touch. And we measure for any leakage, any loss. But I'm looking at this as a 50 to 100-year investment. And our peers are saying, unless you hit it with a backhoe, you really don't have a lot of leakage. There's just not stuff to break it. Does that help?
He's nodding, yes.
Oh, okay. I didn't see you there, man.
Louise,
Louise Bennett. So you said you would compare what's happening at Princeton with what's happening now here at Kendall.
So we could probably spend a whole day and work through some of the puzzles that are here. To do it right, we need to look at what exists. We need to look at financial pictures, environmental. At dinner, we were talking about whether there's a natural gas supply to site and what the power rates are. I'm not really familiar with everything that's at Kendall. We did talk about the main building. That's the one we're in right now.
Yeah.
The main building has circulating hot water already. You don't need to dive in with both feet. You could do one building at a time. And a building that already has circulating hot water or air conditioner and a mechanical air conditioning in a mechanical room would be an ideal way to start. But I don't know all the puzzle pieces that I couldn't say definitively tonight. This is the answer. I can say this is an answer I would begin to look at.
So I think some of the residences have this, don't they? I don't know, but at Kendall, don't some of the residences have geothermal? Okay.
I
Yeah.
know my dad lives over at Whitehorse Village and they are entirely geo-exchange. But I don't know the situation here. I think this is probably.
Yeah,
a little older.
The cottages built 10 years ago are all geothermal. With a well for every duplex.
Excellent. Okay.
But not seasonal storage.
No,
Right. And you can break these ideas apart. One is the use of heat pumps for heating and cooling the house. I would do that at my house, like we had talked about before. I don't plan to put in a big thermal energy storage tank because remember, I'm not economically motivated to. I don't pay a different price at night versus the day. So I have no economic benefit from that storage.
Let me
And-
piggyback on that question. I'm sure that you've done an analysis of retrofitting for higher efficiency in your older buildings. And I'm curious as to what your conclusion was. Does it actually have an impact?
Yes, tremendously, but again, I'm not a big proponent of throwing away perfectly good stuff. So when we, maybe on a 30-year cycle, when we gut and renovate an older building, that's the time when we would install a completely new mechanical system. We wouldn't just take apart the mechanical system for only this purpose. I will say that on the university campus, there's buildings that predate the Revolutionary War. They're sacred to the campus. They're sacred to the US. We're not just going to rip them apart and build a more efficient one. So we have to be very, very customized and very thoughtful about how do we treat that single pane leaded glass? And how do we treat that stone wall that's a true stone wall? And can we make it more efficient without causing humidity issues? So a lot of these are very careful solutions that take an architect and an engineer holding hands and working very thoughtfully for a while.
More Zoom questions?
not right now.
Another question while you're looking there. I saw one of your first slides that you had a CO catalyst. Are you capturing CO2 or studying that?
No, we're not. And no, I'm not. It is a platinum rhodium catalyst, not unlike the catalytic converter on your car. And basically that deals with the carbon monoxide that is a result of the gas turbines combustion. They put out a lot of carbon monoxide, but it mitigates that. Ideally, I'd like to just simply burn less stuff and not try to do a different system than that. Sure.
Jim Cower,
Hey, Jim.
Jim Cower, former chemical engineer turned organic chemist.
Oh,
later.
you should stand up here. I'll sit down and listen to you.
Anyway, two items of local history. About 50 years ago, living next door to Kendall, maybe 45 years ago, I buried a regular polyethylene pipe 3 feet down. I had somebody come and trench it and bury it 3 feet down out to a water faucet near my garden, which was about 350 feet away. And it was a Sears Roebuck polyethylene tubing, about 1.5 inch inner diameter, I think.
Much like the picture up there.
Yeah. But it was just buried 3 feet down.
I'm scared about what you're gonna say. I don't know.
It worked great for about 5 years. And then suddenly it started leaking seriously. And we dug, I paid my son to dig down. And he found that a sort of a triangular shaped rock had been driven into it because we had a very cold winter and it must have frozen 3 feet down. So warning is probably you want to carry the water down in either a stainless steel pipe or a regular steel pipe the first 3 or 4 feet in this area here.
So one of the, I hear you and I totally agree with your comment. The horizontal pipes that are going to be closest to the surface, we're very thoughtful about how we bed them. So they're going to be surrounded by, first of all, the pipes are insulated, the horizontal ones. Second, they're bedded in sand. And we're pretty careful telling all the construction people, it's not okay to throw any debris. We watch very carefully for things like the rock you're describing.
Well, we got rid of that pipe. I wasn't going to dig it up and change it. And I found that a garden hose laid on the surface worked quite well to get the water out into the backyard, as long as it was a fat enough garden hose.
As an engineer, I tend to oversolve problems too. So I would bury the line in the backyard because I could. The hose is way cheaper and lower maintenance, and that's a better choice for the application.
Second comment was a neighbor of mine. He's almost as old as I am, which is 95.7 years. Put in a geothermal system where he had 2 wells dug, one for pumping up the water and one for pumping down the water.
This one, I know where it's going.
And he found that his house was too warm in the summer and too cold in the winter. So he's now put in an air conditioning system and a oil burning furnace. So,
Oh.
So I'm crying about that. I'm really sorry about his experience. I can tell you that much bigger players, some very well-known universities in New England have installed the open loop wells like you just described for an entire university. And they are crying because they've silted up over time and they're useless. And we're making sure to do a closed loop because first of all, I don't want to own the whole aquifer. If somebody has a problem downstream, I never want to be responsible for having touched the water in the aquifer. I hear you on that. That would be very troublesome.
anyway, those are my 2 cautionary tales. I bombed out on the first one and my neighbor bombed out on the second approach.
The first one, I would have done the same thing and the neighbor, sorry for.
Thank
you.
Comment.
Good comment.
We have another comment on Zoom.
ahead.
Betty Berger.
Thank you for a really wonderful presentation. I was just wondering whether climate change, I mean, really ups and downs, but also sustained climate change in different parts of the country. Is the system flexible enough? It sounded like it was, but do you anticipate that this might be a problem in the future?
I think climate change is already a tremendous
yes.
problem, but yeah.
But I meant
Yeah,
of the system. The
So
heat
if,
cooling
right-
is,
yeah, at my house, we have an air to air heat pump. So I take energy from the winter air and concentrate it with the heat pump and heat up the house, and it works. And I take, in the summer, heat out of the house and I deliver it to the air, and it works.
Right.
But it's a little bit challenged on the very coldest days. Seems fine on the hottest days. But if I do the geo exchange and I put it down the ground and back, I'm playing against roughly 55 Fahrenheit all year instead of maybe 0 degrees or 5 or 10 degrees during the winter and 100 or maybe someday 105 or 110 degrees in the summer. So I have a much more consistent playing field, if you will, thermally, if I'm using geo exchange than if I'm using an air source heat pump. And so I'll say the challenges are the challenges of global warming are mitigated by this, and it will help me use less energy. I think I'm setting up a system that's got a lot of forgiveness if we either overbuild or we don't throw away the perfectly good stuff we already own. And I should have no problem heating and cooling the university. Does that address your question?
yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Good question, too.
Any more questions in the auditorium? I don't see any here. Ernie, are there more on Zoom?
We do. Someone in the Murray household, please unmute.
This is Jill. I had a question about how you determined how deep the pipe goes. Is it where the rock is, or how far through the rock you have to go?
The answer is through failure. That's a really good question. We wanted to go 1,500, 1,800, or even 2,000 feet deep, because as you can imagine, the deeper we go, the fewer wells we need, right? We tried to go, I think, 1,800 feet, and we ended up going 1,500 feet, and we discovered that the last many feet were extremely slow and extremely expensive to bore. So we sort of reverse engineered it and said, what's the most cost-effective depth for us to go, respecting that we want to use as little real estate as possible. And we found that if we stop at 850 feet deep, that hit about the sweet spot economically. If I were doing it at my house, I have enough space, I might do 2 wells that are only 200 or 250 feet deep. But the university, the land is a little bit more precious. So we wanted to go as deep as we could.
If I could follow up on that question, I'm still puzzling over the distinction between working with a constant ground temperature versus storing heat in the ground for seasonal change. In other words, part of what it seems to me you're doing that's different than what we're doing with our geothermal here is we're working with ground at a constant temperature. You are trying to change the temperature and then retrieve that later on. Is that a function of depth, or how should I think about that?
Yeah, that's, again, really insightful. If we do this at Ted's house and we put 1 well at Ted's house, I'm going to put all the heat from the summer down there. And that 1 well, the heat's mostly going to dissipate. So by the winter, I'm not going to be playing with a 90-degree geo exchange field. I'm going to be playing with a 50-degree, 55-degree ground temperature, maybe slightly above that, but not by the end of the winter. But let's imagine we do 100 wells. So we have 10 wells by 10 wells. They're 20 feet apart. So now I've got a 20-foot, a 200-foot by 200-foot by 850-foot deep cube. The wells in the center, by the end of the summer, they'll be 90 degrees Fahrenheit, and the rock around them won't be. And the wells right around those will be 90 degrees and the rock around them will be. And once we get all the way out to the perimeter, you know, that 200-foot edge, those might be 60 or 70 degrees. And so you're going to have some conductive heat loss out the sides. But the ones in the summer may take months and months and months to lose any heat at all. So the difference is at home, I'm dealing with a single line heat source and heat recovery. At the campus, we have a huge array. And so we're able to store in the core, and we're not naive. The edges are going to lose some energy, but the core is going to stay warm.
So if I can interpret that for our situation here, if we wanted to store heat seasonally, it would be important. The depth would not be the key thing, but the clustering of multiple wells would be the key thing that would allow us to do seasonal storage.
Yes, from a pure geometry standpoint, a sphere would contain the most heat, but that'd be stupid expensive to build. So if you did either a very large cylinder, or in our case, a cube makes a lot of sense, or a rectangular cube makes a lot of sense, given the constraints of real estate and land and roads and fields, things like that.
Okay, that explains it for me. I was confused on that point. One last question. Is there a question in the auditorium that someone would like to raise? How about on Zoom?
I want to say how grateful I am for just this conversation. It's really cool to see you interested.
Well, it's been wonderful having you here, and I hope that someday you'll be back here as a resident and you can help us finish the job that we're starting right now.
It is beautiful. I'm looking around just salivating at where you live.
Thank you very much. Good night, folks.